Welcome to Jazz Piano Skills. I'm Dr. Bob Lawrence. It's time to discover, learn, and play jazz piano. I don't know where y'all live, but wherever it is, I know you're enjoying some cooler temperatures than we are here in Texas. My goodness. Talk about the dog days of summer. It is hot. We have been well over 100 degrees for some time now, and this week is shaping up to break all kinds of records. So what better excuse than to stay indoors and practice the piano, right? That's exactly what I've been doing. Now that we are officially in August, which means it's going to get hotter, which I cannot believe, I want to do a little recap of July. So what did we focus on in July? Well, we continued our exploration of various jazz improvisation exercises devoted to the primary G-flat, F-sharp sounds of music, major, dominant, minor, half diminished, and diminished. And not only did we tackle the primary G-flat, F-sharp sounds, we also explored the altered F-sharp dominant sounds, the sharp 11, the flat 13, the flat 9, flat 13, and the fully altered flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. On top of all that, we had some fun with George Shearing's Lullaby of Birdland, and last week I did a little exploration of the melodic minor modes for you. Of course, we've been following this format since the start of the new year, and we use 5 specific melodic patterns to focus on developing mobile fingering, mobile hands, right? Fingerings that allow our right hand, to be in a constant state of movement. And we all know that, and especially by now, that the constant moving and position of our right hand allows us to establish optimal fingerings, which are needed to produce a solid and authentic jazz articulation. And of course, making sure that we never run out of fingers. As I mentioned, we have utilized this intentional approach for the primary and altered sounds since the beginning of the year. And we will continue to do so for the rest of the year, in which there's just not a whole lot left. So today, we will follow the same format. We will use the same exact format that we used in July for G-flat and F-sharp sounds, and we're going to apply them to the primary sounds of B. So we are now officially on the back side of the circle, working our way up back to C. Wow. So today we are going to discover essential jazz improvisation exercises. And we're going to learn developmental arpeggio and scale patterns of B sounds. And we're going to play 5 arpeggio and 5 scale patterns focusing on fingerings and articulation for the primary sounds of B. B major, B dominant, B minor, B half diminished, and B diminished. So, as I always like to say, regardless of where you are in your jazz journey, a beginner, an intermediate player, an advanced player, or even if you are a seasoned and experienced professional, you're going to find this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for the primary B sounds to be very beneficial. But before we dig in, before we get started, I want to, as I always do, welcome new listeners to the Jazz Piano Skills podcast. And if you are indeed a new listener, if you are indeed new to Jazz Piano Skills, I want to invite you to become a Jazz Piano Skills member. Now, there are various membership plans to choose from, so when you have a moment, check out jazzpianoskills.com to learn more about all of the perks that come along with each membership plan. There are educational weekly podcast packets, the illustrations, the lead sheets, the play-along files. There's an online sequential jazz piano curriculum, which is loaded with comprehensive courses, online weekly master classes, online interactive fakebook. There's a private jazz piano skills community, which hosts a variety of engaging forums. And, of course, there is also unlimited private, personal, and professional educational support. All of these perks are waiting for you, wanting to help you discover, learn, and play jazz piano. So check it all out at jazzpianoskills.com and, of course, become a member. Now, once you get there, looking at the various plans, if you have any questions whatsoever or questions about the perks, please, by all means, do not hesitate to reach out to me. Please let me know. I'm always happy to spend a little time with you, answer any of your questions, and help you in any way that I can. Okay, on to the question of the week, and it's a good one. I received an email from Randy Young. Randy Young, living in Rochester, New York. It's not as hot in Rochester, I guarantee it right now. It's not as hot. But I don't want to be in Rochester in December or January either. So anyway, Randy writes, "It is impossible to study jazz without hearing about the importance of the 2-5-1 progression." I agree. I was wondering if there are other progressions that you would recommend practicing. Any guidance is much appreciated. Thanks for all that you do. Well, hey, thank you, Randy, and you are welcome, of course, and I'm happy to provide you with a little guidance with regard to important progressions that you need to discover, learn, and play. And in fact, I have been talking quite a bit recently about devoting an entire podcast episode to this very topic. So your question comes at a very good time. I'll give you a few progressions today to begin sinking your teeth into, and then I'll expound upon this question even further in an upcoming future podcast episode dealing with this very topic. Okay, to begin, you are correct. Without question, the 2-5-1 progression is the big dog of progressions. No doubt about it. You absolutely should be familiar with this progression, of course, in all 12 keys, and you should be able to play the progression in all 12 keys. And I'm sure you've already picked up on the fact that when you practice common progressions, common harmonic movement like 2-5-1, your ears develop in a big way. So much so that you begin to actually hear and identify the progression in the tunes that you're playing or listening to. So yes, you hear about the 2-5-1 progression because it is the most important progression in all of jazz. But as you have suspected, Randy, there are other important progressions to study and practice as well. I would suggest practicing the minor 2-5-1 progression, so as well as the major 2-5-1 progression. So instead of playing your 2-5-1 just in major, right, begin practicing the minor 2-5-1, which is the half diminished. I'm doing this in the key of C. D minor 7 flat 5 or D half diminished, going to a G7 flat 9, going to a C minor 6. Right? And when I start learning a progression, I like to just play the chord in my right hand, play the bass note in my left hand, so I hear that root movement, and I hear the purity of each chord, that half diminished sound going to that dominant flat 9 sound, going to the minor 6. So again, D half diminished, going to the G7 flat 9, going to the C minor 6. All right. Again, a very common chord progression that you need to play in all 12 keys and be able to identify it when hearing it. Now, the next progression is a variation to the major 2-5-1, which would be the 2 flat 2-1. This calls upon the tritone substitution. So we're substituting D flat dominant for G dominant. So we're going to our 2 chord D minor, going to the flat 2, the D flat dominant 7, which is half step movement, and then half step movement down to the C major. Really pretty. Again, very common movement, half step movement. So instead of 2-5-1, 2 flat 2, 1. Right? Again, chromatic movement, a half step movement, very common. I would practice that 2 flat 2 1 in all 12 keys as well. Next on the list, I would expand my 2-5-1 to be 1-6-2-5-1 or 3-6-2-5-1. So 1-6-2-5-1, C major, going to 6 minor, D minor, 2 minor, 5 dominant, right? Better known as rhythm changes, right? 1, 6, 2, 5. 1, 6, 2, 5. Or a variation of that would be 3-6-2-5-1. 3, 6, 2, 5. 3, 6, 2, 5. Again, circle motion, right? But very common, this rhythm changes 1-6-2-5-1 or 3-6-2-5-1. Again, I'd study that progression in all 12 keys, conceptually be able to recite that in all 12 keys, and then, of course, be able to play that progression in all 12 keys. Okay, next I would build off that 1-6-2-5, and I would do something like this. 1, 6, 2, 5, 5 minor to 1, 7 to 4 major. Very common. Again, listen to this. 1, 6, 2, 5, 5 minor, 1, 7, 4 major. Right, the 5 chord turning into a minor, taking us back to the 1, but the 1 as a dominant, and then resolving to the 4 major. Okay, now I'd expand on that a little bit too. So I do that 1, 6, 2, 5, 5 minor to the 1, 7 to the 4 major, the flat 7 dominant, back to my 1. So it sounds like this: 1, 6, 2, 5, 5 minor, 1, 7, 4, flat 7, back to 1. Again, really common. Another very common progression: 1 major, going to 4 dominant, coming down to 3 minor, going to 6 dominant, 2 minor, 5 dominant, 1. Again, 1, 4 dominant, 3 minor, 6 dominant instead of 6 minor, 2 minor, 5 dominant, 1. I'd also do, I would recommend doing some diatonic practice. 1 major to 2 minor to 3 minor to 4 major. 1 major to 2 minor, 3 minor to 4 major. Again, diatonic movement, very common. And of course, the last two that I'll give you incorporate the diminished chord. So a 1, going to a sharp 1 diminished, going to a 2, going to a 5. Or 1, flat 3 diminished, to 2, to 5. So it's a nice way to work the diminished chord in. And again, very common, very popular movement. So I could go on. That's why I'm going to need an entire podcast episode to do this. But Randy, at least that gives you several additional chord progressions to practice in addition to the 2-5-1 progression. And I hope that helps. But again, if you have any additional questions or you need further assistance or clarification, do not hesitate to reach out to me. Again, I'm always happy to help. Thank you, Randy, for your question. Wonderful. Okay, onward with our exploration of jazz improvisation exercises for the primary sounds of B. Poor fingerings. Poor fingerings. Without question, I sound like a broken record, but I'm going to say it. Based on decades of teaching experience, the number one reason people have difficulty playing the piano is quite simply due to a lack of hand finger mobility, period. Right? It's a type of hand paralysis that makes it difficult for students to generate melodic lines. Right? Scale and arpeggio practice is, of course, a great way to begin developing hand mobility. However, melodies do not just simply ascend and descend in a straight line using scale and arpeggio motion. Therefore, it's important to begin practicing melodic patterns like we've been doing since the start of the year. Wow. So now listen. Practicing intentional shifting, which again we've been doing since the beginning of the year, begins to simulate a musical reality that all of us have to deal with, right? This musical reality, the need to always have fingers available, allowing us to move in either direction, up or down, must be practiced. Must be practiced. And must be practiced in such a way that it develops proper musical instincts and muscle memory, right? Musical instincts and muscle memory that allows us to properly articulate melodies so that they sound like jazz. And this is precisely why the melodic patterns that we are exploring today focus on intentionally creating hand shifts within a melodic line. And not only hand shifts, multiple hand shifts. Right? Even if it's possible to play the melodic line with no hand shift at all, we're inserting hand shifts. The objective is to begin establishing and developing this hand-finger mobility. In fact, some of the fingerings, like I've just mentioned, I have notated in the lead sheet, include multiple hand shifts within one measure of a melodic idea. So throughout this year, we are devoting our effort to exploring all 5 primary sounds of music for all 12 notes of music using arpeggio and scale developmental improvisational exercises that will force us to deal with fingerings and to develop hand mobility. And we are also utilizing the same approach to explore the altered sounds of music, the flat 9, sharp 11, flat 5, sharp 5, flat 13, fully altered, right? Each month, we focus on one of the 12 notes, right? One of the 12 notes, and we devote our entire effort to exploring the primary and altered sounds for that one note. And of course, if you've been doing this since the beginning of the year, we always follow that up with a bebop tune to help us apply our new fingerings and articulation to a musical setting. So the educational agenda for today is as follows. Number 1, we begin our jazz improvisation exercises for the primary B sounds. Number 2, we will play essential arpeggio patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play. From the root to the 13th of the sound, using a root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry point. And number 3, we will play essential scale patterns that you need to discover, learn, and play. Again, from the root to the 13th of the sound, using the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry points. And number 4, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises today using the minor sound. And number 5, I will be playing all jazz improvisation exercises using a traditional swing groove with a tempo of 110. Now, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills member, I want you to take a few minutes right now, hit that pause button, take a few minutes to download and print your podcast packets, the illustrations, the lead sheets, the play-alongs. Your membership, if you have a trio membership, grants you access to all of the educational podcast packets for every weekly podcast episode. And as I mentioned, every week you should have these podcast packets in your hands when listening to the episode, of course, and you should have them sitting on your piano when practicing as well. So if you are listening to this podcast on any of the popular podcast directories, which there are many, Apple, Google, Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and the list goes on and on, then I want you to go directly to jazzpianoskillspodcast.com, jazzpianoskillspodcast.com, to download your podcast packets, and you'll find the active download links within the show notes. And one final but very significant message that I include in every podcast episode: if you are listening at this very moment and you're thinking in your head that the jazz improvisation exercises for the primary B sounds and the various skills that we are about to discover, learn, and play are way over your head, then I would say to you, so what? So what? Who cares? No worries. Continue to listen and grow your jazz piano skills intellectually by just doing that, by just simply listening to the podcast episode. Because every new skill, right? Every new skill is technically over our heads when first introduced. But this is how we get better, right? We place ourselves smack dab in the middle of conversations where we are uncomfortable. We're hearing things that we've never heard before. We're hearing words that we've never heard before. And so we're forced to grow intellectually. Some of it sticks, some of it doesn't. But I say it all the time, right? All musical growth begins upstairs mentally, conceptually, before it can come out downstairs physically in your hands. So sit back, relax, listen to this podcast lesson now to discover and learn. The play, as it always does, will come in time. I guarantee it. Okay, now that you have your lead sheets in your hands, I want to point out a few things. You will see that lead sheets 1 through 5 deal with arpeggio motion, while lead sheets 6 through 10 deal with scale motion. And you'll also notice that the jazz improvisation exercises are the same for all 5 primary sounds: B major, B dominant, B minor, B half diminished, and B diminished. The exercises are, of course, modified to reflect the proper sound. Now, you'll also notice that my suggested fingerings are included for every note of every exercise for every sound. Now, of course, as I have mentioned before in previous podcast episodes, you can modify the fingerings slightly, but be careful, right? Remember, the fingerings are what allow us to play with proper jazz articulation, and the fingerings are what's allowing us to develop this hand mobility, right? This finger mobility. So you may be inclined to change the fingerings to kind of like maybe get rid of some of the hand shifts. But if you do, you'll be working against the objective that we've set out to achieve, right? So just be careful, right? Your easier fingering may end up actually making it harder for you to play and harder for you to develop this finger and hand mobility that we have set out to accomplish. So I'm just throwing that out there, a little caution to the wind. Be careful. Okay, I want you in your lead sheet packet, I want you to grab lead sheet 3, skill 3, and I want you to grab lead sheet 8 or skill 8. Skill 3, lead sheet 3 deals with arpeggio motion and the B minor primary sound of B minor. And skill 8, lead sheet 8 deals with scale movement for the primary sound of B minor. I'm going to play through each of these exercises today. I do not have time to play through all of them for all 5 primary sounds because, well, that's what you're going to be doing. But I'm going to model for you today using the minor sound. So let's start with arpeggio motion as we always do. So grab lead sheet 3. You will see there are 5 exercises labeled A, B, C, D, and E. I'm going to start with pattern 1 or letter A, which is just simple ascending arpeggio motion from the root to the 7th, then from the 3rd to the 9th, from the 5th to the 11th, and from the 7th to the 13th. There is an intentional hand shift with each one of these 4-note fragments of the sound, these arpeggios, okay? So I'm going to bring the ensemble in. I'm going to play the B minor sound at the beginning for a few measures to settle into the groove. And then I will play each arpeggio 4 times before moving on to the next entry point. So we have a root entry point, a 3rd entry point, a 5th entry point, and a 7th entry point, which allows us to explore the entire B minor sound from the root to the 13th. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter A, primary sound, B minor, arpeggio motion. Here we go. right? Very relaxed. So when you're playing these arpeggios, it's not an exercise. Play it musically, right? This is a melodic line. These are melodic ideas. So play them musically. If you're approaching it with a attitude of a mindset of exercise, then it will come off sounding like an exercise. If your mindset is, I am improvising this arpeggio, and I want to play it with the proper jazz articulation and utilizing good fingering, then it's going to come off sounding like that, right? Mindset is everything. So now let's move on to letter B, pattern 2. We continue with our ascending arpeggio motion, but we add a little contour to the arpeggio now. So instead of going straight up, right, you'll see we have this kind of idea, right? Just a simple little contour that takes place. And again, hand shifts are in each one of these arpeggio lines. And again, we're using entry points of the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th. And again, we're exploring the entire B minor sound from the root to the 13th. So let's bring the ensemble in, and I'm going to play this as musically as I possibly can so you get the idea of what we are going for when we practice. So here we go. Check it out. So now on to letter C and on to something completely different, right? Look at the fingerings. The fingerings alone will tell you there's something very different here, right? In letter C, in measure 1, 1, 4, 1, 4, 2, 1. Wow. And then look at the fingering off the third entry, 1, 4, 1, 4, 2, 1. So this is the fingering I'm using for all 4 arpeggio shapes. From the root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry, the hand has to shift. It absolutely has to shift. So this is a great little pattern. Be able to implement the shift and to also play with the articulation where it sounds and feels like jazz. It's not easy. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter C. Here we go. not easy. Without question, I think it's my favorite exercise of the 5 because it really forces a radical hand shift to pull that phrase off. Okay. Well, I say my favorite, but check out letter D. You know what comes next. We have the 8th note triplet that we have to deal with, right? So, but the comforting thing, we're using the same format in terms of our entry points are always going to be the root, 3rd, and 5, and 7. We are exploring the entire sound from the root to the 13th. So we keep the same format, keep those variables the same for all of the patterns, even though we change the rhythm and we change the fingerings, some things indeed do stay the same. So we have these 8th note triplets that we have to deal with. We have to have some patterns that incorporate the 8th note triplet because the 8th note triplet is laced through all the jazz literature, especially in bebop literature, and especially in solos. If you've studied in any transcriptions, you will see the presence of 8th note triplets all over the place. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out pattern 4, letter D, the primary sound of B minor, root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th entry using 8th note triplets. Here we go. Okay, we are now looking at letter E, our final exercise, our final pattern for our primary sound B minor 7 arpeggio, using arpeggio motion. You'll notice that now our melodic idea stretches over the bar line into measure 2. We're back to using 8th notes. The 8th note triplet is not present, right? Which is a relief. So now we're back to straight 8th notes pattern, ascending, some ascending, descending movement with this pattern. And again, intentional hand shifts are placed, multiple hand shifts are placed within these patterns. And again, though, some of the variables remaining the same, right? Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th entry, exploring root to 7, 3rd to the 9, 5th to the 11th, and 7th to the 13th. So we cover the entire B minor sound. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out our last pattern for arpeggio motion today, letter E. Here we go. so now that we have completed our arpeggio study, it's time to turn our attention to scale movement. So pull lead sheet 8, skill 8, pull that out of your podcast packet, your lead sheets, and have that in front of you. You'll see we have 5 exercises again, A, B, C, D, and E, all of them focusing on scale movement. And so letter A is simply ascending scale movement from the root to the 7th, the 3rd to the 9th, 5th to the 11th, and the 7th to the 13th. Of course, there is a hand shift in there as well. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's listen to letter A, pattern 1. Scale 8, scale movement focusing on the primary sound of B minor. Here we go. Do not just brush letter A aside for arpeggio motion and or for scale motion. Being able to play ascending arpeggio and scale movement motion with a nice articulation and fingerings, a nice relaxed feel is not as easy as it may appear. So often students will think, I got it, and they want to move on, and they don't have it. They don't have it. So I cannot stress to you enough the importance of keeping things simple, practicing ascending arpeggio and ascending scale movement, right? And of course, descending too, but right now I'm focusing on ascending. Okay, so now let's look at letter B. Just like we did with the arpeggio, it's still scale motion, but we have a little contour to our line now. So instead of straight scale motion, we have something that sounds like this. Right? So we have a little contour to our scale movement. So let's bring the ensemble in. We're going to do our root, 3rd, 5th, and 7th inch again. Same format. On tempo of 110. We're going to play these lines with the correct and proper mindset. This is an improvisational line that I'm playing, and I want it to sound as musical as possible. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check it out. Here we go. we always deal with the eighth note triplet, right? Whether we're talking about arpeggio motion or scale motion. So if you look at letter C, we're back to our eighth note triplets, ascending through the B minor sound from the root to the seventh, third to the ninth, the fifth to the 11th, and the 7th to the 13th. Multiple hand shifts to deal with. Great little exercise. So let's bring the ensemble in. Let's check out letter C, and let's play it as musical as possible. Okay? Here we go. Eighth note triplets are not easy, right? So the tendency is to want to rush eighth note triplets. So if I could create any kind of imagery that may help, think of it like pulling back the reins on a horse, right? Just pulling back, slightly pulling back, right? So you don't get out in front. We want to lay back. So keep that in mind when practicing eighth note triplets. If you find yourself rushing, don't panic. It's very common. Be consciously aware of pulling back the reins and playing with a nice, relaxed feel behind the beat, so to speak. Okay? All right, so now let's take a look at letter D. We're back to eighth notes. Our melodic line idea is stretching over the bar line. Again, though, same format. Root entry, third entry, fifth entry, seventh entry. We have some nice contour to our scale motion. So again, we want to keep these eighth notes nice and relaxed. And just like with the eighth note triplets, quite honestly, eighth notes, we have a tendency to want to rush eighth notes as well. So have the mindset of pulling back those reins and relaxing those eighth notes and trying to play slightly behind the beat as well. Okay, not out in front. So let's bring the ensemble in and let's check out letter D. Here we go. Hard to believe we are down to our final exercise for today, letter E of Skill 8, exploring scale movement through the primary sound of B minor. Again, eighth note movement, ascending movement. We got some nice additional contour to this scale movement. And again, the melodic idea stretches over the bar line in the measure 2. But again, we keep the same format as we have done not only today, but throughout the entire year, right? Having our set entry points, the root, third, fifth, and seventh of the sound. And again, tempo of 110, nice and relaxed. I have not mentioned this today, but need to. I'm modeling it at 110, but I would encourage you to play these exercises and these patterns at much slower tempos to begin until you get used to the fingering and the articulation. So do not be afraid to play it at 70, 80, 90. Slow it down. Play it at a tempo comfortable enough to allow you to succeed. Then you can begin increasing the tempo as your comfort level increases and familiarity increases. Okay, so let's take a look at letter E, our final exercise for today, exploring the primary sound of B minor. Here we go. As always, we have unpacked an enormous amount of information in one very short, one very fast hour. Like I always say, I feel like I'm running a sprint from the time I start recording to the end. It's like a sprint to get everything in an hour. Yeah, even though I played the improvisation exercises today using the minor sound only, be sure to practice the exercises for the major, dominant, half diminished, and diminished as well, right? They are all laid out for you in your Lead Sheets podcast packet with the fingerings included. Now remember, I mentioned earlier, you can make some modifications, but don't start eliminating hand shifting because you think you can play the same idea without any shifting taking place, because if you do, you're kind of defeating the purpose of what we're trying to accomplish here, right? So you want to make sure you play everything with a nice, relaxed feel, an authentic jazz articulation. You want the mindset that this is a musical phrase that you're playing, not an exercise. Approach it as a musical phrase because you know what? It is, right? It's music. And again, get comfortable with practicing these ideas right from the root, the third, the fifth, and the seventh entry. It's a nice way, organized way, very formulaic way that assures you that you're practicing through the entire sound of the chord, right? Like the minor sound or the half diminished or major, whatever sound you're practicing, right? Wow, that is a ton to practice in a week. So you need to get after it because guess what? Next week we jump into the jazz improvisation exercises for the B altered dominant sounds. So it just keeps coming, right? Whew. And as always be patient, right? Developing mature, professional Jazz piano skills takes time. In fact, takes a lifetime. So begin structuring your improvisation development after the playing demonstrations that I modeled for you today in this podcast episode. And I guarantee it, you'll begin to see, feel, and hear your progress. Well, I hope you have found this Jazz Piano Skills podcast lesson exploring jazz improvisation exercises for the primary B sounds to be insightful and, of course, to be beneficial. And don't forget, if you are a Jazz Piano Skills Ensemble member, I'll see you online Thursday evening at the Jazz Piano Skills Masterclass. That's going to be 8 p.m. Central Time to discuss this podcast episode lesson, exploring jazz improvisation exercises for the primary B sounds in greater detail, and, of course, to answer any questions that you may have about the study of jazz in general. Again, use those educational podcast packets, your illustrations, your lead sheets, your play-along, not only for this podcast lesson, but for all the podcast episodes. They are available. Check out those Jazz Piano Skills courses to maximize your musical growth. And as always, I want to encourage everyone to get involved with the Jazz Piano Skills online community. Get out there, get involved, contribute to the various forums, make some new jazz piano friends. It's always a great thing to do. If you have any questions, you can reach me by phone. My office number here at the Dallas School of Music is 972-380-8050. My extension is 211. If you prefer email, I can be reached at Dr. Lawrence, that's Dr. Lawrence at jazzpianoskills.com, or you can use the nifty little SpeakPipe widget that is found throughout the entire Jazz Piano Skills website. Well, there is my cue. That's it for now. And until next week, enjoy the jazz improvisation exercises for the primary B sounds. And most of all, have fun as you discover, learn, and play jazz piano.